Alright, so this morning I'm going to be looking at some Earle Brown. We're going back in time pretty far to 1965 with Earle Brown's piece String Quartet, which to my knowledge is the only string quartet he ever wrote. We've talked a little bit about aleatory in this series, and certainly there was an aleatoric element to the last piece we looked at, but Earle Brown is really sort of the big one, the guy who took this stuff very seriously and made it his whole thing. And a big inspiration for him was the mobile sculptures of Calder. This is the most famous one. It's from 1959. So he was interested in a very contemporaneous visual art, or fine art, you could say. And that's because Brown was a member of the New York School. Frank O'Hara, who was the curator for the MoMA at the time, was the center of this group of loosely collated artists in New York. Of interest to us are four composers. We're talking about John Cage, Morton Feldman, Earle Brown, and Christian Wolff. And they all did something different, but they were all influenced by this group as and for that reason this group of four composers shares the same name, we could say, with this larger coalition of abstract expressionists. And so the time is 1965, the place is New York, and in the program note, Earle Brown compares this to previous works that he's done and uses the term mobile to explain it. And these are his 25 pages, 1953, and his available forms of 1961. I'll just skip ahead to the first line of music. So you can see that the placement of notes in time is very loose, and the performers are working with huge spans of time, like between 20 and 45 seconds. Brown encourages them to not focus too much on playing things exactly as they appear. It must be understood that the performance is not expected to be a precise translation of the spatial relationships, but a relative realization made more spontaneous through the involvement of the performer's subtly changing perceptions of the spatial relationships. The resulting flexibility and natural deviations from the precise indications in the score are acceptable and are in fact integral to the nature of the work. The result is the accurate expression of the actions of people in a situation where accuracy is not demanded but conditioned as a function within a human process. Even the change from section to section is left up to the performer, but it needs to be within 5 or 6 seconds of one another. So they need to understand what it sounds like when someone has changed sections, and this requires a little bit of rehearsal. The last section of the work is an open form section. So in this case there are 8 to 10 events for each musician, and they can play any of their events at any time, in any order, and at any speed. So this open form thing is a invention of Earle Brown's, and lots of composers since have done this sort of thing. He does have a symbol for everyone to start a section together. It's an arrow, but this is an exception to the norm, which is much more loose. And of course, in his performance directions, he also has a list of like technique text, we could say, indicating, solpont, tasto, etc. So while I am hesitant to show you more of this copyrighted score, the recording that I'll be listening to is a score video. So if you are really curious what everything looks like, you can follow along there. And I'll let you know my thoughts after this quick listen. That is, I think, enough to sink our teeth into this here. Okay, so my thoughts on this piece. For one thing, this handwritten score is just gorgeous. I think if you have the time, I mean, there's a lot to appreciate here just in how everything is laid out, and his handwriting. It's it's just very pretty, especially this last page with the open forum stuff. I love how it's laid out, like all four parts are on the page, so that you're able to perform from the score basically. And also his handwriting of just words is beautiful. Yeah, I felt like it sort of moves at a very slow pace, and that's sort of one of the consequences of breaking the piece up into these long sections, is that sort of becomes the new pacing. As a listener, I found myself like waiting for the next big thing to happen. The harmonic language was very expressionistic, and I could kind of see how this is more abstract expressionism, like an attempt to get abstract expressionism articulated through music. And his little scribbles here, he mentions they're inspired by Jackson Pollock, which I think is really interesting. And I think there's a point in the performance notes where he talks about how this sort of scribbling was actually the first thing he did to generate his musical ideas. And you can kind of see that in the lines that he ends up notating, like where these pitches land. It's very much about the line and the mark you make on the page kind of thing. So definitely very fascinating stuff. And I felt like some of his notation was super effective, and I think it'd be really good to steal, like this idea of the ensemble moving at their own pace between sections, and leaving it sort of up to chance who starts the next section. I think that's really cool, and it created this very seamless effect with very little direction, and it made the moments where everybody was playing together that much more intense. Also, his indications to play as fast as possible, as loud as possible. I think that's super simple but effective. I noticed there's a link to the Earle Brown website here. So it might be worth taking a second just to go through his life. They have this great chronology here. He was born in 1926 and served in World War II. And he died in 2002, I think. So this string quartet was commissioned by Südwestfunk Baden-Baden for Donaueschinger Musiktage. This was the same year that he received a Guggenheim Fellowship. So I think a very important point in his career. Oh, and he was also a lecturer at Darmstadt that year. So, and the following year he would be a lecturer at the Conservatory of Music in Cologne. Yeah, this is a huge point in his career where he was very productive and getting a lot of success and notoriety. So I learned a lot, I can say, just from looking at this score in detail for the first time. And this score is a thing of beauty. It's really unique, and you can tell he's put a lot of thought and craft into creating this thing all by hand. And yeah, that'll be it for Earle Brown. And we will keep going further back in time tomorrow.